We're glad that you've chosen to spend this evening with us at this webinar. My name's Carla Cornett and I'm part of the Learning Network based in the Yorkshire Plus region. Positively Rural is an established quarterly webinar, and these webinars are planned and organised by a team of people who are passionate about mission and ministry within the rural context. During our Positively Rural gatherings, we reflect on how we might best minister and engage in mission in the rural context. We share good news stories from the rural context and consider ideas for mission together. We hope that this webinar, and indeed all our Positively Rural webinars, provides you with an opportunity to listen to experienced practitioners, but importantly, to be a place where you can share and engage. And we'd love to hear your good news stories too. It's good to welcome everyone here this evening, but especially good to welcome those who are going to be helping us to explore our theme of family engagement together. Caroline Hewlett, who will help us explore what Forest Church is, and Lucy Moore, who will be reflecting on the use of Messy Church. Caroline has been a vicar of Swaledale in Arkengarthdale, deep in the Yorkshire Dales, for the past 15 years. Part of her work has included turning a churchyard into a conservation area with bees and a bat project, and growing Forest Church work out of that with a team of local people. Lucy Moore was part of the team that set up the first Messy Church and has been working at BRF, supporting the growth of Messy Church since 2008. Today is actually her last day of work for Messy Church, as she's moving on to a growing faith role in the Church of England. She lives in Hathersage and is part of the new Messy Church team there. It's good to welcome you both with us this evening. You may have seen a message already pop up on the screen. We will be recording this session. Please contact the event administrator, Catherine, in the Sheffield District Office if you have any concerns about this. So before we begin, can I kindly offer some housekeeping as we go through this evening? We're hoping to have no technical issues, but please be patient with us if we do. If for some reason you end up dropping out of the meeting because your internet drops for whatever reason, just use the same link and we'll let you back into the meeting. During the plenary sessions, we would be most grateful if you would kindly keep your sound muted as much as possible, as that will allow everyone to better hear the contributors. If you need to speak to either the host and the whole webinar, please use the chat function. If you need to speak to any of the team, then please do that via Catherine. We'll be using the breakout rooms during the webinar. These rooms will not have a specific facilitator allocated, so please be mindful of allowing everyone who wishes to contribute. We of course also kindly request that you contribute and listen with respect. If somebody would like to take a note or two of what was discussed and then add it into the chat, that'd be really appreciated too. We do, of course, encourage you to share good practice from this webinar, but we ask that you do not share other people's stories. That's their story to share. And finally, please only share with others what you feel comfortable in doing so and is, of course, yours to share. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Some people have already sent in questions, but if you think of a question for the speakers as we go through the webinar, I encourage you to make a note to yourself, and then you'll be invited to raise your hand and we'll answer as many questions as we can and have time for at the end. And finally, it's a pleasure to welcome one of the team who planned this event, Caroline, to lead our opening devotions. Over to Caroline. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. So I'm going to read firstly from Paul's letter to Timothy, the second letter, chapter 3. But as for you, continue in what you have learned and firmly believed, knowing from whom you learned it, and how from childhood you have known the sacred writings that are able to instruct you for salvation through faith in Jesus Christ. All scripture is inspired by God and is useful for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness, so that everyone who belongs to God may be proficient, equipped for every good work. So let us pray. Heavenly Father, we just give you thanks that through the blessing of technology, we are gathered from many different parts of the country, from different rural contexts, but also in this week of prayer for Christian unity, we come from different traditions. We thank you for the richness and diversity of those traditions and the willingness to share them as we focus on our mission with families. Open our hearts and minds to your spirit, that the stories that we hear may be sources of encouragement for each of us. We just lay all that we have done today to let us be present in this conversation. And guide us by your Spirit to do your will and be ready and willing servants in the name of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. So I'm now going to hand over to Lucy Moore, who's going to share with us.
Thanks, Caroline. Thanks, everybody. Lovely to be with you tonight. It feels like quite a momentous occasion, actually. My last event for BRF, Bible Reading Fellowship, which is the organisation that supports Messy Church and a chaplaincy and parenting for faith as well. So lovely to be here. What I thought might be most helpful in this particular period of time is to divide it up into kind of 4 parts, my little 20 minutes. And I'm going to start off by just talking, explaining what Messy Church is, just in case there's somebody here who's never encountered it yet. And then I thought, pause and do a kind of, let's get it out of the way, a kind of, okay, thinking about rural ministry, what are the things that are negative about rural ministry as regards Messy Church, working with families and so on? But we'll get over that quickly because it's too depressing, and get on to the many, many more really positive things that there are about rural ministry. Just so that you know, I'm not just talking out of my backside and I'm sitting in a nice safe suburb somewhere talking about rural stuff. I was brought up in very rural Lincolnshire, surrounded by cabbage fields and Brussels sprouts and other such glamorous things. And then after some time in Oxford, we moved to rural Yorkshire. We were up near Skipton for a bit, so it's nice to see Suzanne's here from the Skipton area. And we were in a village between Skipton and Keighley. Lived there for 7 years. Went down to kind of semi-rural Hampshire. It was quite safe rural, I have to say, down there. And most recently, we've been up in the wonderful Peak District, just up the road from Jonathan, in the Hope Valley over the last year. So the Messy Church that I'm part of at the moment is a very, very rural one. And I just want to lay it on the table for a start. This is a really, really tough time to be doing family ministry. And my heart goes out to the whole church network and Messy Church network in particular, because it's really hard work, isn't it? And we've done our level best at BRF to try and come alongside people over the last year and a half and help and be there, be a shoulder to cry on in some cases, provide resources for what is a really hard time. But it's tough, and I think it's worth just acknowledging that right from the start. This is not the easiest time in the world to do family ministry. But having said that, we know that, we all know that, but let's just pat each other on the back and say it's okay, we're all in the same boat. So, overview, little bit of negative, lots of positive, and then I thought it might be nice to finish up with just kind of dreaming dreams a little bit about what rural churches could do, and might be happening. It might be happening somewhere that I've just not heard about. And if it is, it would be lovely to know. As I chat, you've all got bags and bags and bags of experience with all this. Please do put in the chat your own experience, anything that resonates with you, or that you find is completely different in your particular context, because this is all about us learning together. So do share your stories in the chat as well. That would be great. So, Messy Church has been around some time now. It's coming on to adulthood. With nearly 18 years old. Who knew? And it's one of those ministries that a lot of people have come across, and that's people in the church and families out there in the communities. Lots of people have come across it, and not everybody knows what it is, but people don't like to ask anymore, because it's a bit like asking what sellotape is, because because you've heard the word and you've seen it around and everybody else knows what it is. So you've got to kind of pretend that you know. And it's a ministry which is, let's face it, which is really easy to do badly. And a lot of people think they know what it is, and steam into doing it without thinking about it, and do it in a half-baked way. For example, they do it thinking that it's just for children, when right from the get-go, right from 2004, the whole idea of Messy Church was that it would be intergenerational, that it would be church. I want to say church at its best. I don't mean Messy Church is the best example of church. I mean church at its best is church with all sorts of different people, where we do our discipleship together with people who are incredibly different from us. And one of those differences is, of course, age. And some churches have just got one age group. And that might be a very wonderful age group, but the whole glory of church, as Paul wrote about in Galatians, is this breaking down of divides between different sorts of people. And breaking down the divides between the generations is such an exciting thing to be involved in, and such a good thing that church can do, I think, better than anyone else. I think it's a really positive thing about all sorts of church, that we can do intergenerational really well. So Messy Church is, in brief, usually once a month, which makes us ask questions about, is it really church when it's that regularity? It has its advantage because it's kind of, it's nice that you're not churning out something every single week, so you've got time to reflect on what God was doing in the last one. And also for busy families, and goodness me, the families in this village are busier than anyone I know. There's so many opportunities for them, goodness. It means that they're only prioritizing church once a month. That obviously has its disadvantages, but for people just starting out on faith, that can be a huge advantage. Once a month, church done really well, that you really look forward to. It's on a day and at a time that suits the people in your particular context. So that's probably different for all of us here. And the pattern, the shape, is usually something like a very, very warm, intentional welcome that assumes that people are going to be there who've never set foot in a church before, followed by an hour of activities on the Bible theme of the day, or a particular story, a particular verse, a particular theme of the day. And you might have 8 or 10 activities set out in your pub, in your church, in your hall. And people just go and explore the Bible theme together in their family groups, friendship groups. No pressure to do any more than you want to. No pressure to move on from the first activity if you enjoy that. And at each activity, you may have a leader who can talk you through it and help you think about why you're doing the activity, not just what to stick where. Then we have a short celebration of story, song and prayer, where we gather together for 10-15 minutes and worship God in a more traditional way, I suppose, in a creative but kind of gathered worship way. And then it rounds off with a meal at the end for everybody, not just the children. It's for everybody to sit around tables and eat together. And for some messy churches, that's just a sandwich or a piece of cake. And for others, it's a hot meal because that's what their context needs. That's what people need around them. They need a hot meal. They don't know when the next one's coming along. And that meal is something about the kingdom of heaven being enacted in front of people, with them immersed in it, that abundance, that overflowing cupness. We've just had the wedding at Cana in the Anglican lectionary, and that idea of, gosh, there's really good stuff here and there's more than enough for all of us. That's the feel of a good messy church. But the great thing about messy church is that it's not about the shape. The shape is just something to hang the values on. And the values are what makes a messy church a messy church. So over the years, we've developed this, and they stand the test of time, actually. The 5 values are being Christ-centered, so everything is done in the name of Jesus and for his glory, and that's what we're all about. And it's about hospitality, it's about creativity, it's about celebration, and it's all age. So Christ-centered, hospitality, creativity, celebration, and all age. And it doesn't matter what shape your messy church is, that will depend on your context. And we're all in very different contexts here, and we're all rural. So every single church changes the shape, does things for longer or shorter time, puts things in a different order, does them in a different way, because you know your context. And that's the really important thing. But what makes a messy church is having those 5 values. And that's what some people forget. They forget to put Jesus at the center and just do it as a craft club. Or they forget creativity means much more than just gluing and sticking. It's about the whole way of thinking, of celebrating God's creativity. Or perhaps they forget about it being all age and they just do the whole thing for children. But when you get those 5 values intersecting together, that's when you have a cracking time with a messy church. And we're learning all the time. But there's a lovely, lovely learning network across Messy Church with lots of free masterclasses at BRF. And there's messy meetups that you can join in. And there are people in the support teams just desperate to walk alongside you and help you do your messy church as well as you possibly can. So lots of friends out there to lend a hand. And messychurch.org.uk is the go-to place for all that. Oh, so rural. Look, Andrew, I can see you on my screen. Can you just do frantic throat-cutting gestures if I overrun? If I remotely get near overrunning, please stop me, because it's a really fascinating thing, Messy Church, and there's so much so much to enjoy in it. The negative stuff, just putting it out there. Okay, these are the things that I've thought of. You've probably got some other things as well that you beat your head against a wall about. there are fewer people around. There aren't as many. And so sometimes when you see pictures of a massive urban messy church with 250 people in the centre of Newcastle, and you've got kind of 2 families and half a dog, then, you know, it can be a bit depressing. But actually, and for teens as well, there's a smaller pool of people to draw on as well. I mustn't get positive already, but I need to say I'm a great believer in the value of the small and the single. So yes, numbers can be superficially depressing, shall we say. Travel can be hard for people in rural areas, of course, and getting to the messy church can be a problem for some. Not restricted to rural stuff. We had one family at my last messy church, which, as I say, was sort of semi-rural, who had to walk 1.5 miles with 4 children, one of them in a pushchair, and that was really tough for them. Another one on Shetland, they had a long walk along a busy road to get to the Methodist church there. So yeah, travel can be a problem. I put down parochialism or competition. I think it is perhaps a problem in some country parishes, some country churches. And it's this, there is a thread of looking out within your own borders and not being bothered about what goes on just over the hill or just up the valley or just down the road at the next village, or perhaps a competition with the next village. Yeah, I as a child, I was ferociously competitive with Freeston, which was just up the road from my church, which was in Butterwick. We shared a vicar. It was absolutely ridiculous that I thought we had to be better than Freeston in everything. But it was a very sort of parochial mindset that I had to grow out of. I hope I've grown out of it. Facilities in many small churches can be limited. And when you're doing a cooking, when you're trying to do a meal, then that can be a challenge. And I remember one lovely group of older ladies who were putting on a messy church in their church, which was on top of a hill, and it had no electricity, never mind a kitchen. And they said, no, we think the meal is really important. We're going to cook jacket potatoes in our own kitchens, and we're going to wrap them up in foil, and we're going to put them in cool boxes, and we're going to bring them to the church and eat them up there, and we'll bring the plates back to our own homes to put in the dishwasher. They were unstoppable, but the facilities can be a problem. I mean, toilets, you know, not all churches have toilets. And when you've got families coming, that's tricky. And the last one I put down is that some buildings, some church buildings, some halls and so on, have a really rubbish location. And I have to say that in Hathersage, we are deeply jealous of the Methodist Church in Hathersage because they are slap bang in the middle of the village. Everyone goes past the Methodist Church, whereas the Anglican Church, the parish church, is up on top of a hill, miles away from everything else. So beautiful spot, but really rubbish for mission. So that's got the negative stuff out of the way. I'm sure you've got more. That you can think of. Do stick it in the chat to have a complain about it with friends. Positively, the model that is Messy Church works in the countryside. From the get-go, we've had churches doing Messy Church in the countryside, in all sorts of settings, but including rural ones. And the message comes back consistently. Yes, it works in a rural setting. You don't need to mess with the model. It does work. You contextualize it, of course you do, but it works, which is hugely reassuring. I find that one of people's anxieties about Messy Church is sharing the word. How do you, if you're in a church with no children at all to start off with, How do you communicate with anybody? How do you get children and families to come? And in a village, the network, the grapevine is phenomenal. Everybody goes to overlapping things. They're at football and they're at the choir and they're in the drama group and they go to the Methodist church. So people can talk across all those divides, which is a huge plus. I think there is an argument that families are perhaps more in touch with the natural world and have an intelligence about the natural world, about things, concrete things, not just the virtual world. And in rural settings, there is an appreciation of the natural world, which is particularly strong and particularly good, especially for things like Messy Church Goes Wild, where you're trying to take the Messy Church values outdoors and do it in an outdoor setting, in a different way. Perhaps children may be in schools that are smaller and have mixed age classrooms. And so perhaps in some cases, the children are more used to looking out for those younger and older than themselves. So the all age nature of Messy Church does lend itself to that. And local businesses can often be approached to contribute in some way, and perhaps to give sausages or coffee or something, because they know that you're going to gossip that around the community as well. Everyone's going to know that those amazing pies came from that butcher. So that can be a real plus, getting the local businesses on side. I think there is a case that sometimes in some villages there's less to do, and so church can actually be the best gig in town very easily. And a Messy Church can be a draw which brings the whole village together. So, you know, if you're not there, you're really missing out. And also for people who have moved to a village specifically because they want the community, then that's a plus, because a Messy Church is creating community in the very way it does church. Loads of time to chat to people, to get to know them. And for the people who are kind of stuck in a village or in a rural setting because they're perhaps trapped in poverty and can't move away, then here is something that's free and on their doorstep. And that's a huge plus as well. So it's quality community happening in everyone's community. That's really exciting. And of course, ecumenical. Working ecumenically is so much easier in villages than in towns where there are so many people. But villages work ecumenically really well together. So just dreaming dreams, very, very briefly. A few ideas I've been toying with, especially since moving up to the Peak. Wouldn't it be great if we were doing a monthly Messy Church in our village, but that we could draw on the resource of other churches around the place, perhaps other Messy churches. So, for example, there's one church that's been doing Messy Church for ages. They've really got their feet under the table. And they want to start a discipleship group, a Messy Basics course, perhaps. Well, we could invite our families to go along there. We could go along with them. Perhaps we could do a Messy Church Goes Wild outdoors in another of the villages and do that with them. So we're not having to put it on ourselves. We can join in with them. One church perhaps can only do Messy festival events at Christmas, Easter, harvest, but they can do them really well. Perhaps we could swell their numbers and go and join them for those and make it an even bigger festival occasion. And maybe things like a Messy pilgrimage, a walk for families to do together, thinking about ways of worshipping God in the great outdoors, or a Messy family camp. What a lovely way to give people a treat of a holiday together in God's name, not too far from where they live. We could do that with the churches from a 10-mile radius working together. That could be really exciting. I'm going to shut up, Andrew. You've been very restrained. Thank you. Yes, lots of opportunities for Messy Church in the country. I am shutting up now.
That's okay. Thank you very much, Lucy. Fabulous. We love your enthusiasm. That's great. You've packed a lot into your 20 minutes, lots for us to think about. So we're going to go into some breakout groups. There'll be about 6 of us in a group. As Carla said, there won't be a facilitator. We'll just chat amongst ourselves. You might want to just do a brief introduction in your group to perhaps just say where you're from or something like that, but don't take up lots of time because we've not got loads of time in the group. The questions will appear in the chat. There's 2 questions. I'll just read them out. How do messy churches help each other out in your rural area? And if they don't yet, how might you support each other? And what could you offer the wider messy church network, specifically from your rural context? We'll just see where your conversation takes you. We're not too worried about answering all the questions. It's more important that you share some of your experience and reflect on what Lucy's shared with us. And when we come back, we won't be doing a formal feedback session, but you'll be invited to put any comments into the chat then. So we're going to go into our groups. Okay, welcome back, folks. Thanks for the comments that are already going into chat. I need to put mine in a moment. Just going to hand over to our second speaker, going to hand over to Caroline, who's going to focus on Forest Church.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm going to do a bit of fiddling around just to try and share my screen. So hopefully you can see what I'm showing. And just to say hello to those people I know, just want to acknowledge Sue Pellett, who's here, who's very much part of our Forest Church team. So she'll keep me right if I tell you any sillinesses. Right, let me try and get the share screen. There we go. That. Share. Right, are we there? Can you see that? Okay. I'm going to rattle through. You can't say everything in 20 minutes, but happy to engage with people afterwards. I'm coming to you from Swaledale with Arkengarthdale. That's what a lot of this area looks like. It's all very pretty, except when it's under snow. And we're in the northern Yorkshire Dales. We're pretty remote, rural. Fairly traditional stuff. We have 4 Anglican churches, Methodist Church, URC Church, and church life is very traditional, based around the seasons of the church year, baptisms, weddings, and funerals, and all of those can be large community events. Maybe just to help you place us, you might recognise these people. This is one of the farms in our parish. This is Amanda and Clive Owen, and you'll have seen them on the television. She's the Yorkshire shepherdess with her 9 children. Well, before she was famous, we had this parish service up at their farm. We baptised their children in the beck by their Packworth Bridge. And I've been here quite a long time. I arrived in 2006, and so I've been vicar here coming up 16 years. That's just by way of saying that things take a long time in the countryside. Things can happen very slowly, but you do get there in the end, so be encouraged. And when I arrived, it seemed that the church community hadn't really done a lot of thinking about ongoing and intentional engagement with children and families in the Dale. So we began very simply. We put a box of toys and a rug and some cushions in each church so that it looked like at least we wanted to welcome families. And then we got a small group of people together to talk about what we could do. And that was a couple of mums, somebody who worked at the school, 1 or 2 of the older ladies from church who said they'd come and make tea. And that's how we started. We began really just by doing one-off events. So we did a Noah's Ark Day. They were often based around a festival. They had a theme, a story, an activity, music, and we always had something to eat and drink. So if that sounds a bit like Messy Church, it probably was, but we didn't even know about that at the time. One of the questions that came beforehand was, how do you make contact with families? Well, this is one of the ways we did it. We did Posada, which is where your Mary and Joseph figures from the nativity set travel around the village. They go to a different home every night. And all that did was give me a list of families, because we did, each of the 4 churches did it. So I ended up with a list of 96 families, and I visited them and contacted them, and other people in the church did. We actually had a contact list to start work with. And one of the questions again that come before was, how do you kind of keep up those contacts? You just have to keep working, visiting, phoning, being in touch, and always have something else to invite people to. So we did that for a year or two. We tickled along doing the occasional event as we got it together. And I always say the voice of God often comes through people. And it was one of the mums who rang us, having done this carol service in a barn. There's a little angel. And then the call came, the voice of God. Thank you for a great afternoon. What's your next children's event? People wanted something else. And that moved us to think a bit harder and to actually become a bit more intentional and missional about the work we were doing with families, and to start thinking maybe a bit longer term rather than just one event to another. So we got a few more people together. We started to plan an event just 3 times a year, each school holiday, just an afternoon. But it meant we always had regular contact with the families and then the next thing to offer. And we always took contact details and made sure that we followed up. So just a few things that we did. Palm Sunday, we had a palm procession. Christmas, you can see the snow behind, and a summer picnic feeding the 5,000, and of course craft. And so really you're going to think this isn't Forest Church, but I wanted to give you the context, because when we started doing our Forest Church work, it didn't come out of nowhere. And we didn't just sit down and go, let's do Forest Church. We had some history with some families. We had some relationships to build on. We had some context, and there were other things going on that led to that. Now, I've had a few calls and emails from people over the last few years asking, how do you start a Forest Church? And some of you, I think, will probably have come with that same question in your mind. I don't want you to be disappointed, but I'm not going to give you 10 steps to starting a Forest Church, because it's really important that you think about your own context, the resources that you have already, the people that you have available, and what their enthusiasms are. So I have come up with a list of 10 things, but they might not be the sort of 10 steps to a Forest Church that you were thinking about. So you might like the idea of doing something like Forest Church, but other factors will shape how you do mission. So context is all important, and what you end up with may or may not look like what we do in Swaledale, and I kind of hope it does look very different and reflects your shape of doing and being. So we're talking about deeply contextual mission, and it should be local, should be ecumenical, and should use the resources that are already available. Open to everyone, so that's all ages and anyone who wants to come, and we're careful to run it well, taking care of everybody, being aware of safeguarding, risk assessments, and all the boring stuff that we all have to do, but all the things that you would do to take proper care in any church activity. So you want 10 things to take away, there's this list. Having said all that, let me take you through our story of how we got to where we are with Forest Church. Some of the things we do, there's Sue in the picture there. Don't know what's happened at the bottom, but bonfires are always a good thing. 3 things came together. So first of all, we had a churchyard project at a church called Grinton, big ancient church with a huge ancient churchyard. And in 2012, a group from the church and the community started developing the churchyard into a conservation area. And that was really because we had 2 problems. We had bats in the church and a hugely overgrown churchyard. And so we worked slowly. We drew in people for the community who didn't have church involvement particularly, but they were keen on green issues and conservation. And over time, over years, this has included work on bats and birds and wildflowers and beehives and grass management by scything. And interestingly, I've got a new curate who pointed out the scything was sort of men's sheds before that existed. And everything we did was partnership working. So we had a local bat group, we had the Yorkshire Dales National Park. They lent us their wildlife officer for a bit and helped us with training. So that was the first thread. The second thread was the Mission Shaped Ministry introductory course. And that was run ecumenically by the Fresh Expressions person in our diocese. And a few people from our churches took part. And I think what that did, it gave us a language for talking and thinking about mission, and got us thinking and looking with missional eyes about what we could do more of in the context that we were in. So that was the second thread. And then the third thread was around the time we were getting into all of this, the schools locally were getting into forest schoolwork. And a couple of our church folks were involved with the school. They'd been trained in this and they were working in the local primary schools. They were accredited forest schools leaders. So all those things kind of came together. And so hopefully you can see how that was coming together. So the churchyard was in good shape to have people doing things in it. We had some forest school expertise. We already had relationships with families and children, and we were starting to think missionally. Let me introduce you. This is Sarah, one of our team. She's a teaching assistant and a member of one of the churches, and she's been involved in all of this right since the beginning. One thing about Sarah is she's one of these people who asks good questions. And she said this: okay, I get that all we're doing in the churchyard is part of our mission, i.e. caring for God's creation. But where's the God bit for people in all this? And that's what kicked us off, really. After some discussion, we decided to try some outdoor activities and some worship under the loose heading of Forest Church as a way of connecting with those families and children in our deeply rural context. And just as a note, there's a spectrum of Forest Church and a variety of groups around the country using that name and doing all sorts of different things. If you Google Forest Church, you get everything from scouting to druids, so you'll see what I mean. At Grinton, we use the outdoor environment for all age activities, and that led us into fairly low-key Christian prayer and worship. And that's what we mean by Forest Church in our context. Other people might use more elements of Celtic or pagan understandings of nature and talk about exploring the Jesus tradition. So in April 2014, we had our first Forest Church session. It was called My Place in His Story. We told a Bible story, did some outdoor related activities, told our own life stories, lit fires, boiled Kelly kettles to make hot drinks, and had some sharing and prayer. And then a number of people came up with the name A Cross in the Wood and started a Facebook page with that name, which Sue works on, and that advertises and celebrates some of the activities. In October 2014, we had another afternoon where we looked at exploring the Christian journey, and we got into lighting fires, and we also made labyrinths out of natural materials and Lego and Play-Doh, and we walked them and we prayed them, and the session ended with sharing and prayer as before. And then another development came because a number of the families started asking about confirmation for the children. And we wondered if we could use Forest Church as a way to deliver this. And we found this course, the Confirmation Experience. It's written by Susan Sayers, published by Kevin Mayhew. You can get it on Amazon. I gather Susan has heard about what we did with it and was really quite happy with that. But it takes the scheme of a rucksack, and each session you put something new in the rucksack. So the Bible is a guidebook, and so on. When we did this, each child had a bag, and each time they put something in it to take home to remind them of the session, and that could be a stone or a handout or something they made in an activity. We planned monthly sessions for this, and that led to a confirmation service which included activities inside and outside and a bonfire where we toasted marshmallows with the bishop in October 2015. Through 2016, Forest Church met on a Saturday afternoon every other month, and individuals and ages varied, but we did have a core of regulars, and there was usually a group of about a dozen people. So each session was themed, and then through the year we used this rustic shelter which we built in the churchyard as an outdoor prayer space, a focus for prayer, and we kept things in it sort of in between sessions that people could engage with. In 2017, we planned to do fewer but longer sessions. We wanted to try running 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. on a Saturday with a campfire lunch included. And we also explored the idea of a 2-day summer holiday event, a mini holiday club, which was a good idea. In the event we didn't get enough take up, so we didn't do that, but I guess that's something we could look at again. I've raced ahead now. In 2018, we had another confirmation course, and again with outdoor and indoor Forest Church activities. We've been a bit on hold through COVID, not because we couldn't be outside, but because of people gathering, and they were quite nervous about that. And we've also had a number of significant changes in our team. So we're intending to regroup, look again at what we can do as we emerge, to use the language. And I think what that will involve is looking afresh at our context, looking at where we are and trying to see again where God is at work so that we can join in. So I think that's the key thing to take away from this, really, is that we didn't sit down and go, let's start Forest Church. It's important. It was a development of things that were already happening, things that God was doing, and it was deeply rooted in relationships and context. And so anything that you do will need to start in the same way. So here's my questions for you to take away and think about. You won't be able to do this in 10 minutes, but I hope you take them away and maybe discuss them with your team. Think about your context, what's already there, what threads can you see coming together, what are the problems or the issues that could become opportunities, what practical resources do you already have? We had a churchyard, but we also had a church that had a loo and kitchen. As Lucy said, that's quite important with families. What are your people involved in and enthusiastic about already? They might not be into outdoor stuff, but they might be into, I don't know, canal boats or juggling or anything else. And where can you see God connecting with people in all of this? I think Katrine's going to put those in the chat so that you can see them when you get to your discussions. I'm very happy to engage with people after this session, and so my contact details are there. Thank you. Is that 20 minutes? I hope so.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Thank you very much, Caroline. That was really interesting, really encouraging. I'm really interested in your confirmation stuff. It sounds really exciting to be doing. For it to have led to that sense of commitment is really, really inspiring for us. So we're going to go into our groups again. Really what Caroline is asking us to do, and it was really important question, is to reflect on that journey that they shared and think about our context. What might we see in our context that might make us think about what we're doing? We're not pushing everybody down the Forest Church route, but we're encouraging us to think about where mission might be for us. So we'll go back into our groups again for about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and we can share stuff in the chat. Thank you.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope that was a beneficial time for you and you enjoyed your breakout rooms. Thank you to our speakers. We have now got just 10 minutes to take some questions. Now, before we get rolling with the questions, just a couple of things to say. One is that both Lucy and Caroline are happy for emails to be sent to them afterwards if we don't get through all the questions, because we have got quite a lot of people with us this evening. So those emails are in the chat, but they will also be sent out to you on an email that will follow this webinar. So if you want to write an email to them, they've both agreed that they would take those questions from you. To take our questions now, I'm going to ask you not to put them in the chat because there's rather a lot of chat and we'll probably miss them, but to use your raise your hand facility. Now on my screen, at the bottom of the screen, I've got a little button for reactions, and you touch that and it raises your hand. That will then notify me that you wish to ask a question. If your screen is different, I'm not sure what your instructions are. Put it in the chat if you need some help, and I'm sure somebody will answer that. So perhaps some of the team will be watching the chat now. But if you want to raise your hand for a question, then please do so. So I have some questions that have sent, so we'll start with those, and then as your hands raise, we can move on to those. So here's a first question, and I'm sure for both Caroline and Lucy, this is not the first time you've heard this question, but one of the questions came as, how do we break down the barrier of traditional church? You know, that barrier where people say, well, messy church, Forest Church, it's not real church, is it? Can you help us with that one?
So I start, keep communicating, keep talking to people, keep inviting people. Each time we've invited verbally and on parish newsletters people to come and see. So we've put it in terms of just come and see one session. You know, you can come and just see what we do, and then maybe come back if you want to. A few did that, not a lot of them. And then we've talked about what we've done in more traditional church services. We've always made sure there's something in church or in the churchyard. We did quite a lot of installation type stuff in churchyards, so that people who haven't been at Forest Church actually see that there has been something that's gone on, that's engaged people. I think Lucy and I, we were talking, we've both experienced people saying, yeah, but it doesn't bring them into church on Sunday, so what's the point? But I mean, that you just got to keep educating, keep talking, keep explaining, and keep sharing.
Lucy, do you want to add?
Well, yes, again, sort of in the breakout room time, we talked about the need to count those times, to count those people. So it's about getting the systems changed as well, and making sure that every one of those congregations is counted. And I think there's also a case for just gentle, ongoing teaching, for want of a better word, in traditional church, about just gently helping people understand what church is. Because a lot of people have never thought through that church could be any different, or indeed has been different over the last 2,000 years. So, but there's nothing more irritating than when people say, oh, it's all very well, your lovely Forest Church, messy church, but when are they going to start coming to church?
Well, it's good to know that we're not alone when we experience those questions. So I've got one hand raised already, so I'm going to go over to Alistair to ask Alistair if you'd like to unmute and perhaps share your question, please, Alistair.
Yeah, I suppose it's a follow-up question to that, because I've been involved with messy churches, very successful ones for quite a while, and sort of less so in the rural context, but still happening. But the question does arise, yes, we know, we're quite happy for this to be church for them, but it can remain a sort of church light. Where does discipleship happen? They're happy to come to these sessions, but how do they grow in their Christian faith and things? And that's been quite a challenge, I think. You did mention, Lucy, a phrase, I don't know whether it was a thing or just something. You said messy basics. Is that a thing?
It was, it was, the Church Army Research Unit did some research for the Church of England about messy church not so long ago, and it was all about messy discipleship. And we worked with 3 dioceses, one of which was very rural, Hereford Diocese, very rural, and Durham and Bristol. And we sort of tried out 6 approaches to discipleship within a messy church community. And the Church Army Research Unit wrote this up as a piece of research called A Voyage of Discovery. And messy basics was one of the things that was tried out. Actually, it was a Methodist church that joined in with all the Anglicans for that. And they were the ones who tried out the basics course. COVID messed everything up, of course it did. But there's some cracking resources that were piloted there, and lots of really, really achievable ideas came out of it. We want to develop them more. And as I move on from the team, one of the things that the team is going to do at BRF over the next few years is to take the resources that are there already and kind of amplify them and help people catch hold of them. And the Messy Basics course will be one of those. I'll put the link for A Voyage of Discovery into the resources so you can have a look at that. But the research findings are, yes, messy church does make disciples, or can make disciples. Yeah.
Thank you, Lucy. Caroline, is Forest Church light?
No, I don't think so. I think people who came saw it as church, although it was always making the connection with other people. I think having done our confirmation course, I suppose there were those who came to those sessions who didn't then go on to confirmation. So I guess that would have been a sort of equivalent of a basics course, really, because it took us through the basics of faith stuff. So yeah, could develop that.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Sheila.
Can I just say what I was saying when we were chatting about the tribal thing? I'd be interested in other people's thinking on this. If you work in a deeply rural area, my feeling is very much that people don't come to faith on their own. They come to faith as they do life, as part of a family, a tribe, a group in which they belong. And I'd just be interested in reflections on that, because I think people actually will come to faith in a tribal sort of way rather than in an individual sort of way. I mean, there will be individual faith, but I just think that we could do some more work around that as well.
Thank you. If people want to comment on that specifically, they could pop it into the chat, or they could email you afterwards. That would be an interesting topic and discussion in its own right. Thank you. Sheila, you have your hands raised. Would you like to ask your question, please? Could you take off mute, Sheila, so we can hear you? Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
It's really a question of information. There's obviously a structure behind Messy Church and BRF. Is there a similar structure behind Forest Church that can sort of supply resources and things?
Well, what we did, we made it up kind of bit
Yeah,
by bit as we went along to fit our context and our people and our resources and everything else. So, you know, there's not an official anything really. We've used resources from all sorts of places. And as I said before, if you put Forest Church into Google, one of the places it'll take you is to a site called Mystic Christ, which is very much more sort of druidy than we've got into. And, you know, you can also go the other way. I mean, ours is sort of almost, well, we've always described it as Forest School with God sort of stuff, you know. And it kind of overlaps with a bit of scouty stuff and different things like that. Whereas actually you could go more on the kind of, you know, druidy sort of end of things. And there are Christians doing that kind of work with particular communities. So I think it's very much this is just what, you know, what we grew where we are, because that's what happened. Yeah.
Thank you.
So,
thank you.
There are lots of groups doing what they call Forest Church, but I don't think there's any, it's not like Messy Church where it's pretty much the same shape and pattern and people link into a thing. I think it's grown in different places in different ways out of context. Yeah, so have a go.
Well, it's a case of finding something to start with. Yeah.
Well, start where you are and see where that ends up, and it may not be Forest Church or anything like that, but that's the point.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think, Caroline, you did mention that you found linking with a teacher or a teacher who'd done some training on Forest School was helpful.
Yeah, Sarah, the lady I showed you, and another person had done Forest School training. And actually later on, I went and did the Forest School training that teachers do as well, just so I had that as part of my background. But a number of the other folks had done sort of Forest School assistant training and that kind of thing. So there was a lot of resource in that sense. It's what we had, so it's what we used.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And just a final quick question that was sent in beforehand is, have you ever used, this is from somebody who's a curate and can see ways of using this as they move into their a training, and can see ways of using in their curacy. And they are saying, have you used opportunities to engage missionally? So not necessarily have you set something up, but has something been set up and you've thought, oh, we could take Messy Church to that, or we could take Forest Church to that, and use it as a mission opportunity?
Messy Church, I mean, basically Christians, Messy Church people in particular, but all Christians are so creative, and sort of when you're in a missional mindset, perhaps you've done the MSM course that Caroline was talking about, you know, you're in this mindset of looking for where God's at work and joining in. And a lot of Messy churches have joined in everything from school fetes and done a Messy Church stand at those, through to county shows and run a Messy Church tent. Probably some of you have been involved in them. And they've done it like a kind of pop-up one in the park on a Sunday afternoon type thing. They've gone to, oh goodness, like on the edge of sporting events. They've they've done a Messy Church there. It's just looking for where people may want to bring their whole family and take part, and using it as a springboard into out of an event into church, because probably church is the best means of making disciples, but starting with an event is a brilliant way of starting. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Anything to add to that, Caroline?
We've taken Forest Church where we've been asked to, and we're not very far from Scargill House in Kettlewell, and they do a family camp event in the summer, and we've done a bit of Forest Church there. Took the team. We also have a number of agricultural shows in the Dale, and the churches together have a stand there, so we've done some Forest Church activities at that. One of the things we have done is installations in churchyards. So trying to say, you know, there's something outside. A memorable one was we had the Tour de France came through Swaledale in 2014. So we put yellow ribbons between all the trees in the churchyard, and then we got yellow plastic plates, which we turned some of them into wheels and had other things about, you know, traveling with Jesus and all this sort of stuff, and hung them all up so that when people were around, there was a thing. And Sue Pellet, who's here, will be able to tell you about others, but we've done quite a number of different ones of that sort of thing. There's a nativity figures that move around churchyards and things each year, different things. So yeah, I mean, ours isn't really a thing, it's what we've done, and you know, it's sort of, it's not a sort of thing that's been rolled out in the way that Messy Church has.
Thank you both so much. It's been incredibly interesting, and we're so grateful for your time and for your inspirational talks and being prepared to take some questions. Just to say very quickly, if you think of questions, remember you can email. But thank you very much, and I hand over now to Andrew.
Okay, thank you. We're nearly finished. Just a couple of final things to say. Yeah, to echo that, thank you to Lucy and to Caroline. Really, really inspiring sharing. Thank you to everybody who's come and shared today. We run Positively Rural about every 3 months, and just to give a push to our next one, which will be on Wednesday, the 27th of April. It's a morning one, it's 10 to 11:30, and we're on thinking about well-being and mental health. I'll send this out with the information afterwards. And we're going to have some input about mental health first aid, and also someone speaking from the Farm Community Network on that occasion. Just to encourage you to use the feedback email for any comments, which will ask some questions about timing of events. We're trying different times of day and things to see what suits. This is our biggest number that we've had on an event, so whether evening, I assume, suits those of us who are here tonight. So thank you very much again. I'm just going to close with prayer. Loving God, we thank you for this time of sharing together and reflecting on what it means to engage with all ages in worship and discipleship. Continue to inspire and encourage us as we seek to find new ways to be church and to live as authentic Christian communities. Bless each one of us as we go from here. May we go knowing your peace in our hearts. Amen.
Amen.
So really good to see you all tonight. Don't need to say travel safely when we're on Zoom, do we? But have a good rest of the evening.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.